My name is Harm. I am a maker. I am an artist. I am specialized in graphic design, fine art, and education. I do not agree with the way media companies and platforms nowadays frame their images. For example, in the Netherlands, a minority group of Dutch Moroccan youngsters is often portrayed as not willing to participate within school and other social structures. The focus is put on the problem and not on the underlying causes and possible solutions. Also, in many news items around the Black Lives Matter movement, this is going on. The focus is on the protesting people and less on the underlying structures of racism and discrimination that have been here for centuries. I think this should change.
Minneapolis on fire.
This is getting serious. Oh my goodness.
You watch the TV news.
We got a little bit of a fire breaking out to the left here.
And you're like, oh my goodness, all the protests are riots.
Vandalizing.
Fires have been started.
Things got out of control. And
we're not going to pay attention to the protesters in a city that has been racked by this violence. Who are marching peacefully and chanting names.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Which is going to get more attention? A group of 35 people standing, chanting names, singing songs, doing the Cupid shuffle, as I saw one group of protesters doing, or 5 people on the ground bleeding and screaming and crying and throwing rocks. Our press is driven by eyeballs and attention and clicks and advertising and passion and raising the anxiety of viewers.
Dramatic images are money. They keep eyeballs on the screen, so they will constantly show action. You need to understand the limitations of those visuals.
Come to me right now. This woman just got tased.
Who is to blame for the violence?
Up to now, we clean up every day. Bags and bags and bags of plastic, rubber bullets, you name it.
Do you consider the effort that you all are doing to clean up the streets as a part of this protest?
So all of this is a part of the protest. We help cleaning it up. Do you know what I'm saying? I've been at the protest every day since this happened. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, this is part of the protest.
What do you expect Minneapolis to look like when this is over?
I'm very interested within this topic in the statues that are dethroned and protected in Europe as well in the United States.
Tens of thousands of people took part in further anti-racism protests across Britain today, with the statue of a 17th century slave trader pulled down in Bristol. The monument to Edward Colston, which had stood in the city centre for more than a century, was toppled and pushed into the river. The latest demonstrations came 13 days after the killing of George Floyd by US police, and despite the government here urging people not to take part because of the risk of catching or spreading coronavirus. Tonight, Boris Johnson defended the right to protest peacefully, but said the weekend's demonstrations had been subverted by thuggery. From Bristol, John Kay sent us this report.
300 years after his death, Edward Colston's fall from grace. For centuries, he took pride of place in Bristol, celebrated as a merchant, politician and philanthropist. Now reviled for his part in the slave trade.
That statue represents
the core of the problem. The white lie we have been told about Roman statues, representation and the way we frame our images and frame our ideas.
This is Caesar Augustus. He was the first official emperor of the Roman Empire. You might be familiar with this little sculpture's very famous original. It's called the Augustus of Prima Porta. It was carved in the 1st century AD during his reign as emperor. Today, it lives in the Vatican museums, alongside a bunch of other famous sculptures. But Augustus, he's not supposed to look like this. He's supposed to look like this.
Let's get this out of the way. Ancient Greece and Rome were really colorful. Their buildings were full of intricate frescoes and elaborate mosaics, and covered with vibrantly painted statues of things like epic battles, glimmering gods, and pretty flowers. But today, most of us picture something more like this: brilliant white marble as far as the eye can see. We're wrong, but it's not our fault. It's Hollywood's fault, and our high school textbook's fault. But most of all, it's this guy's fault. Well, not him. He's just a statue. The blame lies with Michelangelo, the guy who sculpted him, and with many others who made white marble statues during the Renaissance, when European artists, philosophers, and scientists developed a renewed interest in the creations of classical Greece and Rome. Artists like Michelangelo began studying Roman sculptures, like this one, Laocoon and his Sons. They fell in love with its lifelike figures, dramatic scene, and pristine white surface. But sculptures like this weren't meant to be white. Their paint had just faded after being buried or left out in the open air for hundreds of years. So when the Renaissance artists set out to imitate them, they left their masterpieces bare too. And that style took over, inspiring generations of sculptors. White marble became the norm.
This painting actually is a perfect example of what my process is. The model that you see in this painting is a young man that I met in the streets of New York City. Most of the models that you'll see in my paintings are complete strangers. I'll come up to them and ask them if they have an interest in posing for me, which most people say no to. Turns out that approaching complete strangers in urban areas puts people's guards up. And so I've evolved a practice over time of showing examples of my work, trying to convince people of the merit, the history. I invited him back to my studio, and he went through art history books, and what we happened upon was this portrait of a nobleman named William von Hyacinth. What I'm doing in this painting is playing positively with the history of art, but also positing the image of what it feels like and looks like to be in America during this particular time period. It's about this sort of jump in temporal space between the original object and who and where we are today. The body language is one of absolute authority and defiance, but I think it also looks quite different when transposed onto a body in the 21st century. These young black men now occupying this space, once the exclusive terrain of the powerful and the rich. That shift between who gets to be in these pictures and why, I think, is the real meat of this project. Oftentimes when you look at a painting like this, you'll also consider scale. The size of these paintings matters as much as anything else. What I want to do for the viewer is to have an experience in which they're being possessed as much as the painting possesses the sitter. The camera, when I'm shooting the model, is always just a bit lower than eye's view, so that when you're looking at the painting, you get that sense of awe that was originally intended for these paintings. What I'm doing is I'm playing with the language of power that has existed in Western easel painting for hundreds of years. And I'm trying to use certain aspects of that to my own purposes.
Along the way, art historians reinforce this bias, namely this guy, Johann Joachim Winckelmann. He's sometimes known as the father of art history. In the 18th century, he wrote a hugely influential book on ancient art. In it, he argued that statues like this one, the Apollo of Belvedere, were the epitome of beauty, because the whiter the body is, the more beautiful it is. He went out of his way to ignore obvious evidence of colored marble, and there was a lot of it.
But evidence wasn't just ignored. Some of it might have been destroyed. Remember Augustus? When archaeologists rediscovered him in the 1860s, they said his tunic was crimson, his armor was yellow, and his mantle, that's this thing, was purple. And this is him now.
It's unclear if Augustus lost his color by accident, as a result of overcleaning, or if it was removed on purpose. But either way, the same thing happened to a bunch of other famous monuments and sculptures.
Luckily, art historians have since shifted to believe it's not about what people think looks better. It's about what's accurate. But how do they get from this to this.
When scientists photographed this archer's legs under UV light, they saw this, a dizzying array of geometric patterns and saturated colors. And when they compared it to trace pigments on a similar statue, they were able to make this reconstruction.
Which, to be clear, is about as ancient as mine.
Because conservationists never add color to the original. They use 3D scanners to create plaster replicas,
which they then painstakingly repaint with far greater accuracy than I can.
Seeing these sculptures in full color might be a little shocking at first, but that's probably because we've only seen them one way for centuries. To the Greeks and the Romans, painting a sculpture made it complete. Color can make marble seem human, or godlike. It infused them with drama and emotion. It brought history and mythology to life. And even though these reconstructions aren't perfect, seeing these statues in color can bring us a little closer to understanding what the ancient world might have looked like.
One of the possible solutions is education. Knowledge is power. We could design lessons on how racism is working and how to deal with that. This is already happening. I would like to design a class, design a lesson, recoloring the images of our culture, cultural history, and perspectives on our cultural history, of the past, present, and future.